Cheers erupted as the protesters toppled the statue of former President Hugo Chavez, the metal cracking against concrete. The scenes, distributed around Venezuela on social media, showed a crowd smashing the sculpture on a curbside as others came to set a fire inside its shattered belly. But when the authorities rounded up suspects for the vandalism, they were not taken to an ordinary court. Instead, they were hauled off to a military base, where they faced the judges of a military tribunal this past week. President Nicolás Maduro, beleaguered by a second month of protests against him, has prosecuted political rivals under terrorism laws and expanded his powers by emergency decrees. His backers on the Supreme Court have even tried to dissolve the national legislature, which is led by the political opposition. Now, the president is turning to military courts to tighten his grip further, prosecuting demonstrators and other civilians in tribunals that the government closely controls. Continue reading the main story. At least 120 people have been jailed by military courts since early April, when demonstrators began taking to the streets to call for new elections, according to Penal Forum, a legal group assisting those arrested. Another group monitoring cases, Pruvia, counted at least 90 people jailed by the military. Both groups contend that the country has never used the military courts against so many civilians this way outside of wartime. Military justice sows the greatest terror in our population, said Juan Miguel Matos, an opposition congressman in the state of Carabobo. He said at least 69 people there had been jailed by the military since early April. Those held include students, store owners, mechanics and farmers, rights groups say. An entire family was arraigned before a military tribunal in Caracas this past week and charged with inciting rebellion. In one case in the city of Valencia, 2 people were brought before military courts on suspicion of stealing legs of ham during a round of looting, then charged with rebellion as well, according to Penal Forum. They are being treated like they are combatants, said Alfredo Romero, the director of the legal group. It's taking civil jurisdiction and putting it in the hands of the military, like we are in a war. Many see another reason for the military crackdown against the protesters. The president's power is declining within his own leftist party, especially among its law enforcers. Venezuela has witnessed large street mobilizations in the past, most notably in 2014, when hundreds were detained. But while protesters were gaoled, tortured and killed that year, they were largely tried by civilian courts controlled by leftist judges and prosecutors. This year has been different. Attorney General Luisa Ortega, who oversaw the prosecutions in 2014, publicly broke with Mr. Maduro in March after the Supreme Court tried to dissolve the opposition-led legislature. The president backtracked soon afterward. Ms. Ortega has continued her criticisms and now says the state is breaking the law in its repression of the protesters, making it unclear whether she will follow his orders in a crackdown. They're using military courts because the president is assured of the outcome there, said Tamara Traciak, a senior researcher for Human Rights Watch. It's not a coincidence that the moment the government feels they don't control the Attorney General, they look elsewhere to see that they can lock up dissidents. The use of military courts to try civilian cases has long been shunned internationally. Nearly all countries, including Venezuela, are part of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a United Nations treaty that discourages the practice as unfair. The unrest, however, is the biggest challenge to the leftist government since protesters marched to the presidential palace in 2002, setting off a coup that briefly deposed Mr. Chavez, the leader of the political movement that Mr. Maduro inherited after Mr. Chavez died in 2013. This time, with hundreds of thousands of people pouring into the streets to demand new elections to replace Mr. Maduro, clashes between demonstrators and security forces have left at least 40 dead, hundreds injured and scores of businesses looted. Fueling the anger is the worst economic crisis in recent memory in Venezuela, where more than 2 years of low oil prices have led to shortages of food and medicine and skyrocketing street crime. In April, Mr. Maduro announced what he called the Zamora Plan, a set of decrees meant to combat internal and external attacks using the armed forces. Many lawyers and opposition officials see it as the legal premise for the shift to military courts. Mr. Maduro said he had expanded the role of the armed forces in a strategic civil-military plan to guarantee the country functions. He said that the opposition had called for a coup d'état, an accusation he had made before, and that the punishments would be tripled for such offenses. The president has since described the protests as acts of terrorism that would be treated legally as such. A call to the Venezuelan Information Ministry for comment was not returned. This month, Nestor Rivera, the Interior Minister, said on Twitter that the tribunals would be used. Military courts will be in charge of all investigations that are necessary of those terrorists hired by the right, he wrote. Then this past week, Vladimir Padrino, Mr. Maduro's defense minister, told a Spanish news service that he planned to take any protester who attacked National Guardsmen to the tribunals. Military justice will immediately be used to hear this kind of case, he said. Yet human rights lawyers say some cases have nothing to do with attacks against soldiers. Mr. Romero of Penal Forum cited the case in Valencia, about a 2-hour drive west of Caracas, where widespread rioting has led to a near state of martial law. He said his team had recently attended the arraignment of 2 residents who were arrested after cuts of hammer found in their homes, presumably evidence that they had been involved in the rioting. However, when the court announced the charges, the pair stood accused of insulting soldiers and inciting rebellion among those in the town. A narrative was completely invented, Mr. Romero said. Rights groups also point to other problems in the military courts, like a lack of lawyers, different standards of evidence and fewer of the due process protections found in civilian courts. Mr. Romero said many of the charges had been bundled together in blanket accusations that were applied to a dozen or more people. In the case of the family recently charged in Caracas, a mother, father and son, all accused of inciting rebellion, the group's lawyers have been unable to reach the family or learn about the evidence. They are completely incommunicado, Mr. Romero said.